Magnus the Red's present position in the galactic lattice is best described as paradoxical. A demon primarch with a real space foothold, a scholar turned architect of psychic polity, a battlefield actor who prefers patient manipulation to open devastation. The anchor of the paradox is Sortiarius, the planet of the sorcerers, which was drawn from the Eye of Terror into real space during the campaign that culminated in the siege of the Fenris system. Its relocation transformed Magnus's operational calculus by providing a materially anchored locus for projects he could previously only attempt in ephemeral warp phenomena. This changes matters more than spectacle. It allows for long-term sorceress engineering, continuous recruitment, and the construction of psychic infrastructure in a way a fully warp-board tethered demon world could not sustain. From Sortiarius, Magnus pursues several concurrent strands of activity. The most visible is the deliberate cultivation of a kingdom for psychers and warp-touched humans, an organized polity that answers directly to his theological and metaphysical aims. He broadcasts by ritual and astropathic subversion to psychers scattered across imperial space, promising sanctuary from the Adeptus Astrotelepathica and the Ecclesiarchy's purges. Millions are said to hear the call, and many who respond bolster the human demographic of his domain. That recruitment is not merely military augmentation, it is ideological foundationalism. Each defector, each newly arrived seer, is both a resource to be drilled and a node in a nascent cultural network that normalizes psychic life under Magnus's auspices. The mechanism is not crude persuasion but structural offer, sanctuary and training, combined with sorceress rites that bind the populace to Sortiarius' order. I keep returning to the idea of Sortiarius as infrastructure. The Tower of the Cyclops and its surrounding citadels function as relay stations, ritual engines and repositories. Magnus does not simply lord over a city-state, he operates a lattice of libraries, vaults and sanctuaries where arcana are preserved, experimented upon and weaponized. The Thousand Sons are deployed across these tasks, not all of them in purely military roles. The Rubric Marines maintain the borders and enforce order, while the living sorcerers and psi scholars pursue knowledge, create wards and refine the very techniques by which Magnus extends his influence. The key point here, I think, is that Magnus's present warfare is often epistemological, as it is kinetic. To gain new territory is to gain new narratives and new sorceress techniques, and he treats raids and recoveries as curatorial operations aimed at strengthening his intellectual hegemony over psychic things. When battles occur, they are rarely the grand blunt force collisions associated with other Primarchs. Magnus's engagements tend towards surgically oriented raids designed to seize relics, psychers or arcane texts. The thrust into the Stygius sector and the operations tied to the re-anchoring of Sortiarius illustrate this. Thousand Sons warbands and allied cults executed coordinated strikes on astropathic relays, imperial psyche havens and local noble houses with occult repositories, prioritizing targets that alter the balance of psychic information, rather than mere population centers. These actions parallel an older Magnus, who once led strategic expeditions to recover pre-imperial libraries. The difference now is that every cache retrieved becomes a lever for political and psychic influence, and every psyker liberated is a potential seed for new cult structures within the kingdom. The historical context is necessary to evaluate Magnus's choices. After the Horus heresy, his legion's fate, mutation, the rubric and the binding to Tzeentch left him with a smaller but intensely specialized human resource, sorcerers, scholars, and a mass of rubricae that serve as both muscle and monument. The memory of Prospero is not a mere grievance, it is a template he seeks to reinstantiate in twisted form. Where once he endeavored to preserve knowledge and liberate humanity through understanding, his present pathway is to reconstruct a world where psychic aptitude is not only permitted, but cultivated as the preferred human condition. That teleology explains his restraint in direct, large-scale planetary assaults. Such attacks would degrade the very human material he wishes to recruit and refine. In short, Magnus's warfare is preservationist, whenever preservation increases his ability to shape minds. Operationally, Magnus balances long-range occult projects with episodic kinetic strikes. He conducts elaborate rituals to map the psychic topology of the Imperium, tracing astropathic currents, identifying nodes of warp sensitivity, and locating reliquaries of pre-imperial significance. Those rituals are not merely passive, they produce real effects, localized warp storms, alterations in astropathic networks, and sometimes the summoning of demonic entities co-opted into infrastructural roles. Some of these effects are defensive, designed to camouflage Sortiarius' true breadth. Others are aggressive, intended to disorganize Imperial response and to create openings for psychic extraction. The Thousand Suns application of bound demons as servitors, building maintenance, ritual catalysis, turning metaphysical resources into logistical advantages, further complicating any Imperial attempt to strike in the heart of the kingdom. Because of the Cicatrix Maledictum and the ongoing strategic dislocations in the galaxy, Magnus' strategic patience is rewarded. The Imperium is stretched, and the return of a Primarch like Guilliman has not produced a uniformly coordinated Imperial policy. Magnus exploits that fragmentation by favouring disruption over occupation. A captured astropathic relay here, a stolen library there, a wave of recruits arriving under cover of warp storms. These increments accumulate into significant capabilities without provoking the kind of existential reaction a full-scale Black Crusade would. Indeed, Magnus can afford to be metered in his approach, precisely because his aim is to remold the socio-psychic foundations of human society, not to replace it overnight. He invests in institutions that outlast short campaigns, cult schools, psychic academies, and ritual orders. I think this long view is what distinguishes him most starkly from his peers. Specific battles in campaign fragments illustrate his methods. The incursions into Fenris during the late M41 events, often referenced as the Siege of the Fenris Systems or the associated War of the Fang engagements, were more than merely retribution. They were components of a ritual to translocate Sortiarius and to demonstrate the Thousand Suns' capacity to move real space landmarks. That campaign combined localized kinetic force with grand sorcery. Magnus adopted warp storms to isolate the system, deployed sorcerer's columns to suppress resistance, and targeted key psychic loci among the Fenrisian populace and their psychic assets. Those operations were emblematic of his hybrid model: massed sorcery to create strategic openings, focused strikes to seize what was needed, and calculated withdrawals to avoid overcommitment. The lessons learned shaped his later restraint and refined his techniques for anchoring demonic terrain in real space. Magnus' command style in combat is an intellectualized one. He treats battlefields as text to be read and rewritten, and discipline among his sorcerers to exploit psychological fractures. When other Primarchs might rely on massed shock and awe, Magnus uses pattern-breaking false prophecies to draw enemy detachments, predictive divination to ambush relief forces, and sorcerous misdirection to cause units to misinterpret orders. This is not mystical theatrics for their own sake, but tactical economies designed to conserve human resources and to increase the throughput of psycho recruits back to Sortiarius. His tactic set produces casualties, but it minimizes the depletion of psychic talent, his scarce and most valuable asset. I sometimes find myself unnerved by the moral clarity Magnus seems to possess even now. I mean that strictly in an explanatory sense. He has a coherent ideology, psychic liberation through cultivation, that both rationalizes and constrains his actions. That ideological clarity provides a kind of internal logic other chaos leaders often lack. It also gives him patience to run projects over generations. The man who once sought to raise humanity through study has in present refocused that aspiration through the lens of Zinchian patronage. The result is horrific, but not random. If you want to understand why he invests so heavily in libraries, psychic academies, and retrieval missions, view them as the infrastructure of a millennial social project rather than looting operations. There is also an inter-Primarch dynamic shaping Magnus' choices. He is not fully subordinate to Abaddon. Or the other War Masters. His goals intersect but do not coincide. Abaddon pursues domination through military might, while Magnus pursues domination through psychic ascendancy. Where overlaps occur, where a military campaign can be used to capture psychers or relics, Magnus participates. Where they do not, he pursues his own lines of action. This autonomy is both operational advantage and political constraint. He must weigh how openly to act without provoking a coalition that would threaten Sortiarius. Thus, many of his battles are framed as strategic opportunities rather than territory grabs. Capture this archive, corrupt the astropathic channel, secure the allegiance of specific cult networks. The Thousand Sons' reputation as surgical professionals in the occult recovery follows from this political reality. I'll say this plainly. Magnus's present game is, in a dark way, the most intelligent thing any traitor Primarch is actually doing right now. He's not just smashing things, he's building an alternative civilization for Psykers, and that requires infrastructure, time, and a willingness to preserve human minds. It's grotesque and morally obscene from any humane viewpoint, but you can't deny the internal consistency. If you want drama, Magnus gives it through slow, inexorable cultural encroachment, rather than constant explosions. I actually find it more chilling than the others, the idea of an entire sub-society being remade into a warp-centric order. One that people might willingly join out of fear or hope feels scarier than a simple conquest. He's an ideologue masquerading as a sorcerer, and that's what makes him so dangerous. Magnus's present period is also marked by relentless scholarship. Even now, as a demon-touched Primarch, his curiosity drives him to probe Necron stasis fields, Eldar craftworld mysteries, and Tyranid synapse signals when they intersect with psychic resonance. The Thousand Sons mission profile includes retrieving from Xenos ruins and archaeological sites, because a single recovered artifact can unlock methods to extend or hide psychic influence. That breadth of inquiry gives Magnus a multi-domain intelligence capability. His library networks and divinatory rituals are arms of a research apparatus that outstrips many conventional imperial inquiries. In this sense, Magnus remains stubbornly and preternaturally a scholar who sees all conflict as data for a greater design. I think in summary, what Magnus is doing right now is coherent and frightening. He's fortifying Sortiarius as a real space bastion. He runs an acquisitive campaign to gather Psykers artifacts and arcana, and he engages in battles that are precise and ritualistic, rather than purely destructive. He pursues a long, ideological project to reconstitute humanity around psychic primacy. His methods exploit the Imperium's weaknesses, its persecution of Psykers, its stretched resources, its institutional inertia, and transplaces those weaknesses into real gains for the Thousand Sons. If the Great Rift endures and the Imperium's attention remains divided, Magnus's strategy is likely to intensify. If the Imperium recovers cohesion, his projects will have to become either more covert or more spectacular. Either way, he remains a rare kind of threat, not just a warlord, but a civilizational architect of a terrifying sort. This archive has now been fully decoded. Continue your journey with the video displayed on screen. The vast wealth of the archives continues to reveal new knowledge of the dark history of the 40k verse. In the grim dark of the far future, there is only war.